St. Francis, thank you so much for joining us here on Fuse.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I would like to give people the opportunity to learn a little bit about you in that 30 seconds elevator pitch style. Give us the background as to who you are and where you work.
Sure, Dan. My name is Saint Francis Tohlang. I am South African. I work for Nestlé in the East and Southern Africa region. It's a region comprising of 23 countries from the Horn of Africa right down to Southern Africa, including the Indian Ocean Islands. I'm very privileged to be the Corporate Communications and Public Affairs Director for Nestlé in this region.
And it's an exciting region with so much happening and so much diversity and sense of all of the different places in which you work into. And maybe this is a conversation for people who don't live and work in your region, but just help people understand the level of diversity and difference there is, and maybe the frustration there is in the perception that everything's kind of grouped together for people's perception.
Sure, Dan. I think we celebrate diversity, and as you'd appreciate, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, is a very diverse region and part of the world. In the East and Southern Africa region, as mentioned, looking after 23 countries, you rightfully mentioned that the diversity is rich. We have about 500 different languages in our region, mostly English as the medium of instruction in business, as well as Swahili and Portuguese, so Lusophone. We have many different ethnic groups. I think I've lost count in excess of the hundreds in our region. And so what that means is that there's an appreciation for diversity. And in many ways, I think from a brand perspective, it's how do you find ways to celebrate that diversity while being authentic and being true to the brand.
And it's that balance, and we've spoken about this previously on Fuse. It's the balance between what is the communication of the brand values, the assets around that brand, the perception of it, the impact that the brand it has itself, and then the alignment with society and how that all comes together. Just in terms of purpose, particularly, and we're speaking about purpose today, is there a space where there are differences in the areas in which you work where you have to work on fit and alignment more and messaging in one place over another? And as a second part of that, are there ever moments where you have to think incredibly carefully because of, for continuity, people travel?
I think that's probably true for certain brands, but let me speak about Nestle. We're a multinational company. We are in 189 countries. We're the biggest food and beverage company in the world. And so from a purpose perspective, our purpose cannot change. It really anchors who we are. It is the why. It is the reason that we exist. And so in many ways, that purpose will not change. For Nestle, it's been a purpose that has been in existence for 150 plus years. And that purpose is unlocking the power of food to enhance the quality of life for everyone today and for generations to come. And so, I think that that's a very clear purpose. That is why we exist as Nestle. Now, to your point around what does that mean for local nuances or regional nuances, I don't think that the purpose should change. And in fact, I think we, more than other parts of the world, that purpose speaks so beautifully to the opportunity that we have in our part of the world and in this region. I think where it matters is how a brand or a company takes that purpose and really finds ways in which that purpose, one, comes to life, considering the realities of where you operate. Two, you then find ways in which that purpose becomes relevant to your stakeholders and the consumers in which you serve. And so for us, the purpose remains consistent. It hasn't changed for 150 plus years. Where we've had to do a lot of work is how we make that purpose come to life in our region, how that purpose, one, is relevant, and I think it is, particularly in our region. But beyond the relevance, it resonates with our stakeholders. So, consumers, our different stakeholders, be it government, be it key opinion leaders. So, it's about creating the relevance and that resonance for that purpose in where you operate.
And in terms of when you are dealing with that strategic view of how you work with different stakeholders and authorities, etc., are there opportunities that are very uniquely within your region?
Absolutely. And, I'll reference a few examples of why I say that. And again, taking Nestle's purpose and showing how those opportunities find expressions in different ways in different parts of the world. Um, so again, coming back to your question, we particularly operate in a region where we are faced with this triple burden of disease, so micronutrient deficiencies, etc. So those are some of the very specific realities on the ground. And if you speak to consumers, that's an opportunity that is different in how we respond to, right? So one of the ways in which we look to respond to that particular reality while being anchored in our purpose is, providing accessible and affordable nutrition to the population that in many ways, with this backdrop of micronutrient or the triple burden of disease, we also live in one of the poorest regions in the world. So we know that consumers' pockets are stretched, and therefore, using our purpose, unlocking the power of food, the best way in which we can do that is to provide accessible, affordable nutrition. Now, that's not to downplay the need for that across the world, but in our region, it is absolutely critical that we respond to that particular need. And so we see it as an opportunity. How does that translate to how we then interface or interact with different stakeholders? So, for example, governments themselves have clear KPIs in terms of addressing obesity or malnutrition. And so, from a Nestle perspective, we become part of the solution. We demonstrate how we are through reformulation of our recipes, through the R&D abilities and capabilities that we have. How are we then, in many ways, helping them to address some of these issues, i.e., malnutrition or the triple burden of disease? So that's just an example of how, yes, the purpose in itself remains consistent, but there are, nuances and realities in our region. That means that we, again, going back to relevance and resonance, that we can respond to that, and so it becomes a beautiful opportunity to tell a more authentic story from a corporate level in terms of how we demonstrate that impact and how we respond to the reality, which therefore becomes an opportunity for us to become a relevant brand that resonates with consumers and our different stakeholders.
It's very easy for corporations to talk about their authenticity and their brand values and etc., etc., etc. But when you're in an organization that is making a visible difference to society, it must be easier to tell that true story. I'm not saying others are lying, but the authenticity level is there inherently. And one of the things that frustrates me as a professional marketer, communicator, whatever I am, is when a company or organization, a corporation comes to us and say, we want to be seen as X, Y, and Z. And my response is always, well, be X, Y, or Z, and then we'll tell the story of it. So for you, before you even became a part of Nestle, which is a brand which, just for transparency, historically I've worked with as well. What was it that attracted you to that brand particularly? And was it this authenticity and the purpose of the organization?
Wow, Dan, I mean, it's, you're taking me back down memory lane. let me start with the recruitment process. So, in fact, let's take it a step back before even deciding that I would like to join this company and the recruitment process. You're quite right. I think we hold certain perceptions about certain brands, whether right or wrong. I think that's the very nature of a perception. It's exactly that. And to your point, I think Nestle always had this appeal, and being a professional that was very intentional and deliberate about joining an organization that aligns with my value system. Despite the reputational challenges that Nestle has had in the past, that became very apparent when I started doing my research, even considering joining Nestle. And aside, it's the biggest food and beverage company in the world. It's a multinational. It's generally a very good employer. So that aside, fundamental to me was, how does this align to my value system, and would I, hand on heart, defend this organization, especially being in the corporate affairs and communication space. That's a very integral part of the job. Then I think, your first experience of a company is when you are going into the organization. Well, back then we were still physically going into offices for interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And it was then where you start getting a sense of, is this something that's just on paper, or am I feeling, the purpose? Am I feeling the values? And it's an energy. It's something that you can't quite pinpoint or pin down, but it's a feeling. It's a feeling of how they communicate to you in that recruitment process. And so, for me, it was, I think, being more direct in answering your question, it was that I think this company, resonates with me. I think our values are aligned, and Nestle's values are rooted in respect, and that's a value and a principle that I hold dear in my personal life. So it was fantastic. It's a brand that does good. It's a brand that does good without, I think oftentimes not necessarily self-adulating or screaming, at the top of their lungs to say, we're so great and we do good. So in that research process, that was definitely affirmed. I think more importantly, and quite interestingly, I was undergoing the recruitment process with another company. And the experience that I had with Nestle, the feeling that I had walking the corridors during that, recruitment process, affirmed that. And I was, more convinced that this was definitely the right organization that I had to join. And I've been here 7 years and counting, and with no real desire to leave.
I think it can come down to one word. And I don't necessarily believe that everyone sees it in the same way, but it's just how I feel about things. But I think there is the word sincerity. If someone is sincere, or an organization is sincere in its intent, and you can call it its authenticity, that its actions align with what they're saying, whether through corporate social responsibility, through accountability, because let's face it, every corporation, every organization will be called to account at some point or another for whatever it will be, because it's the nature of business, it's the nature of humanity. But I personally believe that if an organization is sincere about its intent, as I said, then there is absolutely something that magnetizes you towards them. And you can be someone who really doesn't like an organization because what they stand for, or they really align with you and you're really attracted to it. So I totally appreciate that. St. Francis, I would love to carry on, but time, unfortunately, is working against us. I would love us to reconnect in the future for a follow-up episode. But in the meantime, to enable people to connect with you, how could people get in touch and find out more?
Sure. I think I am on LinkedIn, so Saint Francis Tohlang, Tohlang. So people can connect with me there. I love connecting with people from different parts of the world. I think there's always learnings and rich sharing that happens there. I'm also on Twitter, and our website is www.nestle-esar.com. So if they want to find out a bit more about Nestle in our region, they can definitely peruse that website, and there's great information and detail there.
St. Francis, thank you so much for joining us today on Fuse.
Thank you so much for the discussion, Dan.